material elements are Bhumir, Apo, Nalo, Vayu, Kamanobhir, Eocha, Ankara, Vinaya. So these 8 material elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether or space, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Everything in the material world is made up of these things. But there's something else in the material world, a different energy, and that is the Jivataka. That's the living entities. And they're also they're like our bodies. We have all these material elements. We have earth, we have bones, everything we eat is from the earth. So it's the human body. And there's water, blood, and liquids coming from the water. And then water, fire. Sometimes I say, I don't see any fire. But there is fire because the temperature in the human body is 98.6, something like that. That means there's fire. It's not a blazing fire, but it has some kind of way of keeping the heat in the body. And there's another heat that's used in digesting food. It needs to be heat. So that's fire. Fire, just like we say, in some countries, instead of calling it the heater, they call it the fire, or electricity, they say the fire. Same thing. Manifestation of that third element. And then after the fire, then there's earth, water, fire, air. Air. We have air in the body. We were talking the other day about how Dhruva Maharaj, at the last stage of his meditation process, he was just eating air. That was the only food he took. And he was living on it. One has to know how to do that. And then, more subtle than air, is space. Or come. Ether. It's more subtle than air because air you can feel. You can feel some sensation. Touch sensation is manifest along with air. And that's more subtle than, as we said, fire and the others. But then more subtle than that is ether or space, because there's sound in that element. And sound is found in that element. And then it's in the other elements too, because they also have space. It's like we say, I need to have my space, my area, or we demarcate certain bits of space as belonging to this person or that person, this country, that country. And then, more subtle than space, is the mind. You can't touch it, smell it, hear it, taste it, or smell it. But it's still there, mind. The mind is subtle and it's used for thinking, feeling, and willing. That's what we do with the mind. Then, more subtle than the mind is the intelligence, because the intelligence is more controls the mind. Intelligence can decide. The mind can bring back all kinds of data from the senses. And it can come in the form of desires. But how to engage those desires, that's required from the intelligence. Intelligence has the ability to analyze the ideas or the data given by the mind. The mind can't analyze it. It just brings it back. It's like we have a dog, he brings the newspaper in his mouth, but he can't read it. He gives it to you, then you can read it. And then mind, intelligence, and false ego. More subtle than intelligence is false ego. Who am I? Who am I? So that every living entity, when they come to the material world and they get a particular body, the body's equipped with the false ego. Has to have the false ego. For example, if a living entity is given the body of a dog, well, most important thing in that body is that he understands he's a dog. Has to understand that. Otherwise, he can't behave properly. He doesn't act like a dog if he acts like a chicken and starts, fluttering his wings and doing like that. It doesn't work. Because she's got eggs coming out and shit. So they have to know what they are. And they have to play that part. Because this is all a role that the living entity is being given. Because he wanted to try to overlord in the material world. So the Lord, the real God, is very merciful. He gives him a chance. Now you take this body, and you can try to lord it over. But you have to do some duty too. So that means everyone in the material world, part of the false ego is like a dog. Dog has a wonderful false ego. As soon as you pick up the dog, or as soon as he comes and you accept him, he says, okay, I'll be the watchman. He just assigns himself. No one had to inform him that you be the watchman here. And when any stranger comes, you make sure they know that they're not welcome here. He knows that. That's part of his false ego. So he's got a duty. And that duty is of some value in the material sense, that it works. If someone wants to keep people out of their space, they put a sign up. Beware of the dog. Trespassers, beware of the dog. If you get in that dog, he may bite you. So this is a false ego. But more subtle than the false ego is the soul. That's the real ego. That's who we really are. It's a living entity. That's the Atma, or the Jivatma. So that is the most subtle, and we're there. If there's no Jivatma, if there's no Atma in the body, even though there may be the other things, it looks like a dog, smells like a dog, all the things. But if it doesn't have the soul, it's a dead dog. Or a human being. Have you ever seen anyone leave their body? One moment they were there you could see their eyes, and they had life in their eyes, and they're breathing, and the soul leaves blank. No brain waves, no heart beating, no desires, just it's a carcass. And then bury it or burn it or do something with it. Because it's decomposing. But that's because the soul has left. When the soul leaves the body's still there, but the person is gone. And when the soul enters into the body. And how does the soul enter into the body? The soul enters the body in the beginning. The beginning when the male has a desire to impregnate a female. So the soul is put in semen, in the seed. And then he transfers that soul from his body to the body of the female mother, and then she takes care until the living entity is ready to come out. Now there's one more element. The material scientists, they study 24 material elements. That doesn't include the 25th, the soul, the living entity, and the 26th is the super soul. Even more subtle than living entity is the super soul, because he's in every body. The individual soul is only in one body. He gets one body at a time. But the super soul is in all the bodies. And he's giving guidance to the soul. The soul is more intelligent than the intelligence is higher. The soul tells the intelligence how to do this. But more intelligent than the soul is the super soul, because he knows everything. Past, present, future. He knows how to take care of everything, to give goodness to all living entities. So if the soul listens to the super soul, then the soul is happy, and then all living entities can be happy together, working under the super soul.
Julie, thank you, Maharaj. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Spoke to Eden.
Hare Krishna. So the super soul is it one living? Is it one entity and shared amongst all the other jivas, or is there like a part of the super soul in each jiva?
It's described in chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita, which we just read, which there's one super soul present within all living entities. He's spread everywhere, but he's not fragmented at all, you could say.
If you think competent to understand, I was wondering, is the subtle, it's a two-parter, is the subtle desire to impregnate a woman all that it takes to put a soul in the semen, or the semen? And then is the semen dead matter until he has this desire?
Say the first question again. It's the subtle desire?
Yeah, so like Maharaj was saying that the desire, or the living entity is put into the semina when the father has a desire to impregnate the woman. So I was wondering if...
there's a subtle desire which leads to a gross desire, but without the gross desire, then it's not going to happen. So, I wouldn't overanalyze what he said. Basically, a woman to have a child requires a man, and the man has to have a desire to do that.
So it is dead matter until he makes the act of impregnating the woman.
I can't really speak of when the soul enters the semen or enters into a seed, for that matter, because a seed can lie dormant, but then that seed can sprout and turn into a tree, and then from that tree so many other seeds can be produced. So I just don't have knowledge of where that enters, where exactly. But as far as I can tell you is that a certain particular jiva has a desire to take birth in a certain form, that's catered to him, given to him by the Lord, or the Lord's representative. So then, this is why in Vedic culture the Garbhodana samskara is performed to attract, pious children. So at some point that soul does enter into that seed, but I don't know exactly when. Yeah, any Bhakta Brian or Mukhtari had something.
Hare Krishna. So my question is that the, not hierarchy, but kind of like the stacking of the gross and subtle elements from earth, water, fire, air, ether, and then the three subtle being mind, intelligence, and false ego. And then above is the soul, which we understand is aloof and doesn't really do anything or participate. Does Krishna consciousness work on each of those three subtle levels? Like that, because we mostly speak about the mind, like the clearing the dust off the mirror of the mind. But I'm curious how, with intelligence being higher and false ego specifically, how Krishna consciousness works to fix them up.
Well, one needs to receive transcendental knowledge. So that transcendental knowledge is applicable to our intelligence. And then as the intelligence becomes purified by receiving transcendental knowledge, then we can apply that transcendental knowledge to controlling our mind. And otherwise we're largely unaware of how unbridled the mind is. Just to deviate from the question a little bit, just to give more context, we may take up chanting Hare Krishna, japa, and your mind may be accustomed to wandering and thinking about so many things, or you never had to sit still for so long or focus on one thing for so long. So you're never aware how much your mind wanders. And your mind can go on wandering while you're externally chanting Hare Krishna for a long time. At one point, sooner or other, you have to realize, oh, my mind is actually wandering. I'm physically doing this activity, but my mind's been all over the universe at this point. So to be aware of that and bring it back. So we have to hear transcendental knowledge to purify our intelligence, so we have proper intelligence to know what's right, what's wrong, how to act properly, because that will help us act to prevent further entanglement. Krishna, he says, Yashastra vidam utraja vartate kama kadata nasa siddham avapnoti nasukam na param gatim. He says, those who follow their own lusty ways and discard the rules and injunctions of the scriptures, they attain either happiness in this life or perfection or the supreme destination. So we have to hear from Vedic authorities and apply that to our life. Otherwise, we're just going to go on the whims of our lusty desires. And where is that coming from? Associating with the mode of passion. As far as the false ego, the false ego can be purified into pure ego. So the way we do that within the material world is we see that I am just a simple servant of the servant of the servant. So we still may have to act out a particular role. Like if I have a job or a certain designation as like a mother, for instance, I can't just be like, I became self-realized and, my kids aren't my kids, I'm just going to leave. And, they're just like hungry and helpless. The role is to play, that particular role, but you do it in a Krishna conscious way. So externally, you're acting according to whatever designation you have, but internally, you're cultivating this true ego of I'm just a simple servant of the servant of the servant. So in that way, the false ego can become purified. As far as I know, within the spiritual world, these things are also there. It's not like we erase them and make them nil. It's just a matter of purifying them and using them in the actual real light of how they're supposed to use. Whereas now, we're using it, looking through this scope of nirmamo, possessiveness, putting ourselves in the center. How can I enjoy? And then that's the issue. So Vedic knowledge is largely giving us intelligence to see I'm not the enjoyer, that I'm small, I am infinitesimal, and the Lord is great. And when I turn to the Lord, life is great. When I turn away, life is a struggle. So I hope that helps at all. Something else? So, and this shloka here is talking about the influence of eternal time. In the Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada, in the introduction, he mentions how the Bhagavad Gita deals mainly with 5 subjects. Does anybody know what those 5 subjects are? You can just shout them out as they come to you. Karma. What? No. It deals with that, but not specifically with the 5 things. Time, kala. Prakriti, nature. Jivas, the living entities. And? Yes, the supreme controller. So these 5 topics, this is the essence of what's being spoken in this Vedic literature, pertaining towards the absolute truth. But of these 5, 4 are eternal. Which one is not eternal? Karma. So it's interesting. Karma is not eternal, but time is eternal. The only difference between time here in the spiritual world is how it operates. Here, time is the driving factor and everything is controlled by time in that way. Whereas the spiritual world, time is just a facet of life that's there to enhance the Lord's pleasure in a variety of ways. So karma is not eternal, and our goal is to terminate this karma. This is why we take the devotional service, so we can act on behalf of the Lord's pleasure and no longer take any more karma. This is why we take shelter of the Guru, because the Guru absorbs our karma. In this way, we can begin to act within this material world, being unaffected by the pushes and pulls of all these reactions. And Prabhupada in the Bhagavad Gita gives a great analogy where there may be a store clerk, working at a store, and so many people are shopping and spending so much money. And within the year, millions of dollars goes through this person's hands. But they're not doing it for their own, they're doing it for the benefit of the store. And the store gives them their allotted quota. And then if anything happens, if some robber comes and steals all the money, the person who's just doing their job is not held accountable. They're not held liable because they're doing it for the higher authority. So similarly, when we're acting on behalf of Lord Krishna and his representatives, then Krishna is taking that karma. But when we're trying to act for ourselves, say we start our own business and somebody comes and steals from us or cheats us, then womp womp, we're held responsible for that, and it's a loss. So similarly, if we're going in life acting against the Lord's will, pursuing our own fruitive enjoyment through karma, then we have to suffer the actions and reactions from all these situations that we find ourselves in. So this is the beauty of devotional service, as we learn to engage according to the pure devotee's will in the service of the Lord, then very easily one can experience this material nature, the effects of it diminish greatly. Prabhupada, one time I was listening to a lecture, it's a very good point that, there's so many scholars in the world, so many people who are very intelligent, but how many people can give up, no intoxication, no illicit sex, who can control their senses in such a way, try to control their mind. But a devotee can come off the street from like the worst of backgrounds and day one can do these things. And as we continue to practice upholding these regulative principles, our mind will become more stable and sharp and strong. But due to our past conditioned nature, it may be strong to deal with these desires that may arise within our consciousness. So we have to take shelter of the process of Krishna consciousness, take shelter of the devotees, take shelter of the Srimad Bhagavatam at all times. Always hearing Krishna Katha, always chanting the holy names, always doing some kind of service. And this way we can be protected because we're attracting the attention of Krishna. But if we want to do it on our own, then we'll face a lot of hurdles along the way. But if Krishna is our supreme destination and we don't deviate from that, then these hurdles will also be opportunities for growth. But if we're not completely convinced that Krishna is really where we want to go, then yeah, all these stumbling blocks can create more problems, that create more reactions, that create more action and more reaction in this material world, which is karma. So we have to terminate this karma by aspiring for pure devotional service. Okay, there's a couple minutes. Does anybody have any final thoughts or questions or comments? Huh? 5 topics? There's the Supreme Lord, the Ishvara, the controller. There's the jivas, the living entities. There's prakriti, material nature. Kala, time. And karma. Yeah, the introduction of the Bhagavad Gita is really nice. Prabhupada really summarizes everything in a nice way. As far as Dharma goes, it wasn't on that particular list, but there's a portion in the Bhagavad Gita, like in the introduction, 2 or 3 paragraphs, which Prabhupada very beautifully describes what is Dharma, Sanatana Dharma. Because what we're practicing, it's very easy to get caught up in the ritualistic activities, the dress, the behavior, the etiquette, and see it as just, some kind of religious activity. But we always have to see that it's actually beyond that. It's the nature of the soul to render service. We always want to do some kind of service because we want to give love and affection to somebody, have a reciprocating relationship in that way. But our service propensities misdirected, and it's misdirected through a sense of selfishness. Either I want to serve myself or I want to serve these people because they're related to my body, or these people are in the same country, I want to serve them. Some kind of selfishness coming from a false concept of self. So as we really put the Lord in the center and adopt the mood of being a servant of the Lord, life can open up to a whole another dimension. Instead of having one little family that I came from that I'm attached, you could see that we're all children of God. And what's the difference between family and not family? Krishna describes repeatedly one who comes to the spiritual platform, he sees all living entities as equal. So why would I distinguish between this particular person and that person? Everybody's just living entities at different paths, different points on their spiritual journey, including ourselves. So we should try to pursue Krishna and conclude our spiritual journey, or start it rather, and help others, along the way by giving them the Maha Mantra or distributing books, distributing prasadam to them, some kind of mercy. And the more mercy that we receive from the Lord and the more mercy we give, then we receive more mercy and more and more. So this is nice. Thank you everybody for hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Shri Gauranatai ki jai. Panchakapatarubhyascha kripasinabhi vachapatitanam pavanevi vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare